Part 1. The New Mechanic. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor of Desert Sky Aviation as Sarah Martinez pushed open the heavy metal door of the aircraft hangar. The sound of her work boots echoed in the vast space filled with planes of all sizes. Some were small private jets belonging to wealthy business people. Others were older propeller planes used for cargo runs across the desert. The smell of motor oil and metal polish filled the air. Sarah carried a simple black toolbox in her right hand. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore basic blue coveralls that looked like they came from any hardware store. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything special or different. She looked like hundreds of other mechanics who worked on aircraft across the country. The other mechanics barely glanced up from their work when she walked in. They had seen new people come and go many times before. Most lasted a few months before deciding that aircraft maintenance was too hard or too dirty for their taste. The work required long hours and careful attention to detail. One small mistake could cause a plane to crash. Jim Rodriguez was the hangar supervisor. He was a thick man in his 50s with grease permanently stained under his fingernails. He had been working on aircraft for over 30 years. Jim walked over to meet Sarah with a clipboard in his hand. His expression showed neither welcome nor hostility. He was simply doing his job. "Good morning. You must be Martinez," Jim said in a matter-of-fact voice. Sarah nodded and shook his hand with a firm grip. Her handshake was stronger than most women her size. Jim noticed but did not comment on it. "Let me show you around and explain how we do things here." Jim began walking toward the nearest aircraft. Sarah followed quietly. She observed everything carefully. The layout of tools on workbenches. The way safety equipment was stored. The organization of spare parts in metal shelving units. "We work on all types of aircraft here," Jim explained as they walked past a small Cessna with its engine cowling removed. "Private jets for rich folks. Cargo planes for shipping companies. Sometimes we get vintage warbirds that collectors want restored. Each type needs different skills and knowledge." Sarah listened without asking questions. She had learned long ago that watching and listening taught more than talking. Her eyes took in details that most people would miss. She noticed which tools were well maintained and which were old and worn. She saw that some work areas were cleaner and more organized than others. These details told her about the skill level and work habits of different mechanics. "The morning shift has 8 mechanics, including yourself," Jim continued. "Most of the guys have been here for years. They know their business. You will start on basic maintenance tasks, oil changes, brake inspections, simple electrical checks. Nothing too complicated until we see how you handle the basics." 3 mechanics worked on a large corporate jet nearby. They wore similar coveralls, but their tools were more expensive and better organized. One of them looked over at Sarah and Jim. He was a tall man with gray hair and a mustache. His name tag read, "Frank New Girl, huh?" Frank called out loud enough for others to hear. "Hope she knows which end of a wrench to hold." The other mechanics chuckled. Sarah showed no reaction to the comment. She had heard worse many times before. "Frank Morrison has been here 15 years, Jim said quietly to Sarah. "He knows jets better than anyone, but he can be difficult with new people. Just focus on your work and prove yourself through results." Sarah nodded. She understood workplace dynamics very well. Every new environment had people who tested newcomers. The best response was always competent work and professional behavior. "Your first assignment is that Piper Cherokee over there." Jim pointed to a small 4-seat plane painted white and blue. "It needs a routine 100-hour inspection. Check the engine oil. Test all the lights. Inspect the brake pads. Look over the control surfaces for damage. Standard stuff, but it needs to be done right." Sarah walked to the assigned aircraft and set down her toolbox. She opened the engine cowling with practiced movements. Her hands moved confidently over the engine components. She checked oil levels and examined hoses for cracks or wear. Everything she did showed experience and knowledge. The other mechanics continued their work but occasionally glanced in her direction. They were curious to see how the new person would handle the job. Most expected her to ask for help or make obvious mistakes. Newcomers usually did. Sarah worked steadily through the morning. She completed the oil check and moved on to testing lights and electrical systems. She found a loose connection in the landing light that could have caused problems later. She tightened the connection and tested it several times to make sure it held properly. At lunchtime, the mechanics gathered around a picnic table outside the hangar. They brought sandwiches and drinks from home. Sarah sat slightly apart from the group. She ate a simple sandwich and drank water from a metal bottle. "So where did you learn about aircraft?" Frank asked Sarah. His tone was not particularly friendly. "Most people around here went to technical school or learned in the military." "What is your background?" Sarah finished chewing before answering. "I have worked on engines and mechanical systems for several years. Different types of vehicles and equipment. Aircraft are new, but the basic principles are similar." Her answer was truthful but vague. She did not mention specific details about where or when she had gained her experience. Frank noticed the evasion but did not push for more information. Yet, the afternoon brought more routine tasks. Sarah worked on brake inspections for 2 different aircraft. She found worn pads on one plane and properly documented the problem for replacement parts. Her paperwork was neat and complete. She included all the required information in the correct format. As the day ended, Jim walked over to check on Sarah's progress. He was impressed by the quality and speed of her work. The Cherokee inspection was completed properly. All documentation was filled out correctly. She had even found and fixed the loose light connection without being told to look for electrical problems. "Good first day, Martinez," Jim said with approval. "You seem to know what you are doing. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. We have a busy day planned." Sarah packed her tools and prepared to leave. The other mechanics were also cleaning up their work areas. She had proven she could do the basic work competently, but she knew that earning real respect would take much longer. She was patient. She had learned patience in places much more difficult than an aircraft hangar. As she walked to her truck, Sarah reflected on the day. The work was familiar even though aircraft were different from other machines she had maintained. The social dynamics were also familiar. New person had to prove themselves slowly over time. She was prepared for that challenge. Tomorrow would bring new tasks and new opportunities to demonstrate her skills. Sarah drove home knowing she had made a solid start in her new job. The real test would come later when more complex problems needed solving. She looked forward to those challenges. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah Martinez first walked into Desert Sky Aviation. Each morning she arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. She worked steadily through her assigned tasks without complaint or drama. Her toolbox stayed organized. Her work area remained clean. She completed every job properly and on time. The other mechanics had begun to notice her consistency. Frank Morrison still made occasional comments about new people and their luck with simple repairs. But even he had to admit that Sarah never made careless mistakes. She double-checked everything. Her paperwork was always complete and accurate. On a Tuesday morning, Jim Rodriguez assigned Sarah to work on electrical problems in a twin-engine Beechcraft. The plane belonged to a doctor who used it to fly between small towns and provide medical care. The navigation lights had been flickering during his last flight. The radio also cut out twice during landing. Electrical problems were tricky in aircraft. Wires ran through tight spaces behind panels and inside wing structures. Finding the source of intermittent problems took patience and systematic troubleshooting. Many mechanics avoided electrical work because it required careful thinking, rather than just replacing obvious parts. Sarah began by studying the aircraft wiring diagrams. She spread the technical manuals across a workbench and traced each circuit with her finger. She understood that rushing into electrical repairs without proper planning usually made problems worse. Other mechanics watched her methodical approach with mild interest. After studying the diagrams, Sarah began testing circuits with a multimeter. She checked voltage levels at different connection points. She wiggled wires gently to see if loose connections would reveal themselves. Her movements were precise and deliberate. Nothing suggested hurry or frustration. 2 hours into the troubleshooting, Frank Morrison walked over to see her progress. He carried a cup of coffee and wore his usual skeptical expression. "The electrical system in these Beechcraft planes can be real tricky," Frank said in a tone that suggested doubt about Sarah's abilities. "You might want to ask for help before you make things worse." Sarah looked up from her multimeter readings. "I am making progress on isolating the problem areas. The navigation light circuit has a voltage drop that suggests corrosion in a connection. The radio issue appears to be related to a loose ground wire. I should have both problems located within the next hour." Frank raised his eyebrows. He had expected her to admit confusion and ask for assistance. Instead, she sounded confident and knowledgeable about the specific problems. He waited to see if her diagnosis would prove correct. Sarah continued working methodically through each circuit. She removed access panels carefully and examined wire bundles for signs of damage. In the left wing, she found exactly what her testing had predicted. A navigation light connection had corroded badly. Green and white powder covered the terminals where moisture had caused chemical reactions. She cleaned the corroded connection with proper solvents and applied protective coating to prevent future problems. The navigation lights immediately stopped flickering when she tested them. One problem solved through systematic diagnosis rather than random part replacement. The radio problem took longer to locate. Sarah had to remove interior panels to access the antenna ground connection near the tail of the aircraft. She found a loose ring terminal that had vibrated away from proper contact with the aircraft frame. The loose connection caused intermittent radio failures exactly as the pilot had described. Sarah tightened the ground connection and applied thread locking compound to prevent it from working loose again. She tested the radio system thoroughly on different frequencies. All functions worked perfectly with strong, clear signals. Both electrical problems were completely resolved. Frank Morrison watched Sarah reassemble the aircraft panels. He was surprised by her systematic approach and successful repairs. Most mechanics would have spent much more time and possibly replaced expensive parts unnecessarily. Sarah had diagnosed both problems correctly and fixed them with minimal time and cost. "Nice work on that electrical troubleshooting," Frank admitted grudgingly. "You seem to have a good understanding of aircraft systems for someone new to the field. Where did you say you learned electrical work?" Sarah secured the last access panel before answering. "I have worked on various types of electrical systems over the years. Different applications, but the basic principles remain the same. Voltage drops indicate resistance problems. Intermittent failures usually involve loose connections or corroded contacts." Her explanation was technically accurate, but revealed nothing about her specific background or training. Frank noticed the evasion again, but was more impressed than suspicious at this point. Good troubleshooting skills were valuable regardless of where someone had learned them. Word of Sarah, successful electrical repairs spread through the hangar quickly. Aircraft electrical problems had a reputation for being difficult and time-consuming. The fact that she had solved both issues in one morning caught everyone's attention. Even the mechanics who had been dismissive began to take notice. The next major test came 2 days later. A wealthy businessman brought his vintage Cessna 180 to the hangar, with engine troubles that had stumped mechanics at 2 other airports. The engine ran roughly at idle and lost power during climb. Previous mechanics had replaced spark plugs and adjusted the carburetor without solving the problem. Jim Rodriguez assigned the troublesome Cessna to Sarah. "This will be a good test of your diagnostic skills," Jim said seriously. "The owner is getting frustrated with mechanics who cannot find the problem. He's considering selling the plane if we cannot get it running properly." Sarah accepted the challenge without hesitation. She began with a thorough examination of the engine logbooks and maintenance records. Previous mechanics had focused on ignition and fuel delivery systems. Their repairs had been logical based on the symptoms but had not solved the underlying problem. Sarah decided to approach the diagnosis differently. Instead of assuming the previous mechanics had missed something obvious, she considered what problems they had not investigated. Engine roughness and power loss could indicate internal engine damage that would not be fixed by spark plugs or carburetor adjustments. She performed a compression test on all 6 cylinders. This test measured how well each piston and ring assembly sealed during the compression stroke. Healthy cylinders maintained high pressure. Worn or damaged cylinders showed lower compression readings. The compression test revealed the real problem. Cylinder number 3 showed significantly lower pressure than the others. This indicated worn piston rings or damaged valves that were allowing compressed air to leak past the piston during the power stroke. The engine was losing power because one cylinder was not contributing its full share of energy. Sarah explained the test results to Jim Rodriguez and showed him the compression readings. "Internal engine wear is causing the power loss and rough running." The previous mechanics were treating symptoms rather than the root cause. This engine needs cylinder work to restore proper compression. Jim was impressed by Sarah's thorough diagnosis. Internal engine problems were among the most difficult to identify without proper testing. Many mechanics avoided compression tests because they required removing spark plugs and using specialized gauge equipment. Sarah had chosen the right test and interpreted the results correctly. The Cessna owner was initially disappointed to learn his engine needed major repair work, but he was also relieved to finally understand what was wrong with his airplane. Sarah had solved a mystery that had frustrated him and several other mechanics. Her reputation for competent troubleshooting was firmly established throughout the hangar. Captain Jake Morrison stepped out of his silver BMW convertible and adjusted his expensive aviator sunglasses. The desert sun reflected off the polished chrome and leather of his flight jacket. Everything about his appearance was designed to impress. His uniform was perfectly pressed. His shoes were polished to mirror brightness. Even his haircut looked like it cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Jake walked toward the Desert Sky Aviation hangar with the confident stride of someone who believed the world revolved around him. He carried his flight bag casually over one shoulder and checked his gold watch with obvious importance. Other pilots respected Jake reluctantly because he was skilled at flying, but most people found his attitude insufferable. Inside the hangar, Sarah Martinez was completing routine maintenance on a Piper Archer. She had the engine cowling open and was checking oil levels and inspecting hoses for wear. Her coveralls were clean but showed the honest stains of someone who actually worked with her hands. She moved efficiently without wasted motion. Jake spotted his assigned aircraft across the hangar floor. It was a sleek Hawker business jet that belonged to a technology company executive. The plane was scheduled for a flight to Los Angeles in 2 hours. Jake expected it to be perfectly prepared and ready for immediate departure. "Who is working on my aircraft today?" Jake announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. His tone suggested ownership rather than simple professional interest. Several mechanics looked up from their work with expressions of mild annoyance. They knew Jake Morrison and his demanding attitude well. Jim Rodriguez walked over to meet Jake. "The mechanic assigned to your plane today is Martinez," Jim said while pointing toward Sarah. "She has been doing excellent work since joining our team, very thorough and competent with all types of aircraft systems." Jake looked in Sarah's direction with obvious skepticism. He saw a woman in work clothes focused on her current task rather than rushing to greet him. In Jake world, this showed lack of proper respect for his status and importance. He had specific ideas about how mechanics should behave around pilots. Sarah finished checking the oil level in the Piper engine and made notes on her inspection form. She was aware that Jake Morrison had arrived, but saw no reason to stop her current work to acknowledge him. Professional courtesy did not require dropping everything to welcome every pilot who entered the hangar. Jake walked over to where Sarah was working. His expensive shoes clicked importantly on the concrete floor. He stopped close enough to her work area that she would be forced to notice his presence. Sarah looked up from her inspection checklist with a neutral expression. "I am Captain Morrison," Jake said with emphasis on his title. "You must be the new mechanic I heard about. I hope you understand that my aircraft requires very careful attention to detail. My passengers depend on perfect maintenance and safety checks." Sarah nodded politely. "All aircraft receive the same careful attention regardless of who flies them. Safety is the most important consideration for every plane that leaves this hangar. Your Hawker is scheduled for inspection in 30 minutes. I will complete all required checks before your departure time." Jake was not satisfied with her professional response. He had expected more deference and recognition of his status. Most mechanics went out of their way to assure him that his plane would receive special attention. Sarah treated him like any other pilot with any other airplane. "Let me be clear about my expectations," Jake continued in a condescending tone. "I have been flying for 15 years. I started in the Air Force and flew commercial airlines before moving to corporate aviation. I know exactly what proper maintenance looks like. I will be watching your work carefully." Sarah returned her attention to the Piper inspection without comment. She had dealt with difficult personalities many times before. The best response was always professional competence rather than argument or confrontation. Jake Morrison could say whatever he wanted as long as he did not interfere with her work. Jake was irritated by Sarah's apparent indifference to his impressive credentials. He decided to establish his authority more directly. He walked to his Hawker jet and began his own pre-flight inspection, even though Sarah had not started working on it yet. He wanted to demonstrate his superior knowledge and catch any mistakes she might make. 30 minutes later, Sarah completed the Piper inspection and moved to Jake aircraft. She carried her toolbox and inspection clipboard with the same calm efficiency she showed with every job. Jake positioned himself where he could observe and comment on everything she did. Sarah opened the Hawker engine compartment and began her systematic inspection. She checked fluid levels first, then examined belts and hoses for signs of wear or damage. Her movements were precise and methodical. She documented each step on her inspection form as required by federal aviation regulations. "Make sure you check the hydraulic reservoir carefully," Jake instructed from over her shoulder. "These hawkers are known for hydraulic leaks that can cause serious problems during flight. You need to look at all the connection points and seals." Sarah had already identified the hydraulic system as a critical inspection item. She was examining exactly the components Jake mentioned when he gave his unnecessary instructions. She continued her work without acknowledging his comments. Her silence annoyed Jake even more than direct disagreement would have. "The oil level looks low to me," Jake said as Sarah checked the engine oil dipstick. "You should add at least a quart before we fly today. I do not want to risk any oil pressure problems during the flight to Los Angeles." Sarah showed Jake the dipstick reading. "The oil level is within normal operating range. Adding oil unnecessarily could cause overfill problems and actually create safety hazards. The current level is appropriate for your planned flight distance and duration." Jake's face reddened slightly at being corrected by the mechanic he was trying to instruct. He had made an error in reading the dipstick but did not want to admit his mistake. Instead, he chose to question Sarah's judgment and experience with aircraft maintenance. "I have been flying these hawkers for 3 years," Jake said defensively. "I think I know how to read an oil dipstick properly. Maybe you should ask one of the senior mechanics to double-check your work before signing off on my aircraft." Frank Morrison heard the conversation from across the hangar. He walked over to see what was causing the disagreement between Jake and Sarah. Frank had worked on Hawker jets many times and knew their systems well. He could settle any technical dispute quickly and professionally. "What seems to be the problem here?" Frank asked while looking at both Jake and Sarah. Frank had little patience for unnecessary drama in his workplace. He wanted facts rather than personalities involved in any technical discussion. Sarah held up the oil dipstick for Frank to examine. "Captain Morrison believes the oil level is too low and wants me to add more oil. I believe the current level is within normal operating specifications for this engine type. Could you give us your opinion on the proper level?" Frank examined the dipstick carefully under proper lighting. "The oil level is exactly where it should be for normal operations. Adding oil would actually put it above the maximum safe level. Martinez is correct about the proper fluid levels for this aircraft." Jake felt embarrassed and frustrated by being wrong in front of the mechanics. His expertise had been challenged and found lacking. He decided to assert his authority in other ways rather than admit his error about the oil level. "Fine," Jake said curtly, "but I want extra attention paid to all the safety systems. Check the lights twice. Test the radio equipment thoroughly. I do not want any surprises once we are airborne with passengers." Sarah continued her inspection without reaction to Jake's demanding tone. She always performed thorough safety checks regardless of pilot attitudes or instructions. Every aircraft received the same careful attention, whether the pilot was pleasant or difficult to work with. The inspection took exactly the time Sarah had estimated. Every system functioned properly. All fluid levels were correct. The aircraft was ready for safe flight operations. Sarah completed her paperwork and prepared to present the maintenance log to Jake for his signature. Jake reviewed the inspection checklist with exaggerated care. He was looking for any excuse to criticize Sarah's work or demand additional checks, but everything was documented properly, according to federal regulations and company procedures. He could find no legitimate complaints about her professional competence. "The aircraft is ready for your departure, Captain Morrison," Sarah said formally. "All required inspections have been completed successfully. The maintenance log is ready for your signature and review." Jake signed the maintenance log with obvious reluctance. He had hoped to find problems that would justify his condescending attitude toward the new mechanic. Instead, she had performed flawless work while remaining completely professional, despite his difficult behavior. As Jake prepared for departure, he made a mental note to request different mechanics for future aircraft maintenance. He preferred working with people who showed proper respect for his status and experience. Sarah Martinez clearly did not understand her place in the aviation hierarchy. The morning started like any other Thursday at Desert Sky Aviation. Sarah Martinez arrived at 7 o'clock sharp and began organizing her tools for the day ahead. She had 3 routine inspections scheduled, including a small cargo plane and 2 private aircraft. The Nevada desert sun was already heating up the hangar even though it was still early. Jim Rodriguez was reviewing work assignments when his phone rang. He answered with his usual professional tone, but his expression quickly changed to one of concern. Sarah noticed him writing notes rapidly while asking urgent questions about timing and weather conditions. At 8:30, Sarah heard the distinctive roar of a jet engine approaching the airfield. She looked up from her current inspection to see Captain Jake Morrison aircraft making an unusually fast approach. The Hawker business jet touched down hard and taxied quickly toward the hangar. Something was clearly wrong with the normal schedule. Jake burst through the hangar doors with none of his usual swagger or self-important attitude. His expensive uniform was wrinkled. His perfectly styled hair was messy from running his hands through it. Most shocking of all, his face showed genuine fear and desperation instead of arrogant confidence. "I need my plane ready immediately," Jake announced loudly to the entire hangar. "This is a medical emergency. Life or death situation. Where is Rodriguez? I need someone working on my aircraft right now." Jim hurried over to meet Jake while several mechanics stopped their work to listen. "What is the emergency, Captain Morrison?" Jim asked with professional calm despite Jake's obvious panic. "What kind of medical situation are we dealing with here?" "There is an 8-year-old boy named Tommy Parker," Jake explained rapidly while pacing back and forth. He was camping with his family in a remote area near the Utah border. A tree fell on their tent during the night. The boy has serious head injuries and internal bleeding. He needs to get to Denver Children's Hospital immediately. Sarah continued listening while pretending to focus on her current work. She understood that time was critical in medical emergencies involving children. Every minute of delay could mean the difference between recovery and permanent disability or death. The nearest hospital helicopter cannot make the distance. Jake continued his explanation. "The boy has been waiting 4 hours already while they tried to arrange transport. The local ambulance took him to a small regional hospital, but they do not have the equipment or specialists he needs." Jim nodded grimly. "How long is the flight to Denver? What is the current weather situation? Do you have clearance for an emergency medical flight?" These were practical questions that needed immediate answers before any aircraft could depart safely. "Flight time is 2 hours and 40 minutes direct route," Jake replied while checking his watch obsessively. "Weather is clear all the way. I already have emergency clearance from air traffic control. The family is driving to meet us at the regional airport right now." Sarah realized the critical problem facing everyone in the hangar. Jake aircraft had been scheduled for routine maintenance that morning. The 100-hour inspection was due, and several systems needed to be checked before the plane could legally fly with passengers. No aircraft could depart without proper safety inspections and mechanical sign-off. "Who was assigned to work on my plane today?" Jake asked with growing desperation. "The maintenance was supposed to start at 9 o'clock, but this emergency cannot wait for normal scheduling. I need someone working on it immediately." Jim looked uncomfortable as he delivered bad news. "Your regular mechanic called in sick this morning with food poisoning. Martinez was scheduled to handle your inspection, but she has not started the work yet because of the timing change." Jake's face went pale as he realized the implications. The mechanic he had treated so poorly for weeks was now the only person who could prepare his aircraft for the most important flight of his career. His prejudices and ego suddenly seemed ridiculous compared to a child life hanging in the balance. Sarah had been listening to every word while continuing her current inspection. She understood the situation completely. A young boy was dying while adults discussed schedules and procedures. The technical work needed to be done quickly but thoroughly. No shortcuts could be taken with safety even during emergencies. "Martinez," Jake called out with none of his usual condescending tone. "I know we have had our differences, but I need your help today. This little boy will die if we cannot get him to Denver. Can you inspect my plane and get it ready for emergency departure?" Sarah looked up from her work and met Jake's eyes directly. She saw genuine fear and desperation instead of his usual arrogance. For the first time since they had met, he was asking for her help rather than demanding it. The change in his attitude was complete and obvious to everyone watching. "I can have your aircraft ready for departure in 90 minutes, Sarah said calmly. "That includes complete safety inspection and all required system checks. No shortcuts will be taken that could compromise flight safety. The emergency situation makes thorough preparation even more important." Jake nodded gratefully without arguing about the time required. He understood that Sarah was promising to work as quickly as possible while maintaining proper safety standards. 90 minutes seemed like forever when a child was dying, but he had no choice except to trust her professional judgment. Sarah immediately abandoned her current work and gathered the tools needed for the Hawker inspection. Other mechanics offered to help, but she declined assistance. She knew the aircraft systems better than anyone else available. Adding extra people would only slow down the process and create confusion. The hangar became unusually quiet as Sarah began her emergency inspection. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Other mechanics continued their assigned work, but frequently glanced toward the Hawker to monitor progress. Even Frank Morrison offered to help with paperwork or tool organization. Sarah worked with focused intensity that impressed everyone watching. Her movements were swift but deliberate. She checked each system thoroughly without wasting time on unnecessary procedures. Her hands moved over control surfaces and engine components with practiced efficiency. Jake paced nervously near his aircraft while trying to stay out of Sarah's way. He made several phone calls to coordinate with the hospital in Denver and the family driving to meet them. Each conversation increased his sense of urgency and responsibility for the young boy's survival. 40 minutes into the inspection, Sarah discovered a problem that could have caused serious trouble during flight. A hydraulic line showed signs of minor seepage that would have been acceptable for normal operations, but could fail under emergency stress. The line needed immediate replacement before departure. "We have a hydraulic leak that requires repair," Sarah announced to Jake. "The seepage is minor but could become dangerous during extended flight operations. I need 30 additional minutes to replace the damaged line and test the system." Jake's face showed panic at the delay, but he forced himself to remain calm. "How serious is the leak? Can we fly safely with the current condition?" He was desperate to depart immediately, but understood that mechanical failure during the emergency flight would help no one. "The leak must be repaired before departure," Sarah said firmly. "A hydraulic failure during flight could cause loss of control and crash. The repair will take 30 minutes, but it is absolutely necessary for safe operations. There are no acceptable shortcuts with hydraulic systems." Jake accepted her decision without argument. He understood that Sarah was protecting both the aircraft and the young patient they were trying to save. Her professional judgment was keeping everyone safer, even though the delay was emotionally difficult to accept. Sarah worked steadily on the hydraulic repair, while Jake continued coordinating the emergency response. The replacement line fit perfectly, and all connections sealed properly under pressure testing. The hydraulic system functioned normally with no signs of leakage or pressure loss. 2 hours after Jake's desperate arrival at the hangar, Sarah completed the final safety checks. Every system had been inspected thoroughly. All required paperwork was complete and properly signed. The Hawker business jet was ready for the emergency medical flight to Denver. "Your aircraft is ready for departure, Captain Morrison," Sarah announced formally. "All safety systems are functioning properly. The hydraulic repair is complete and tested. You have clearance for immediate takeoff to save that little boy's life." Sarah Martinez moved through the aircraft inspection with the focused intensity of someone who understood that lives depended on her work. Every movement was deliberate and precise. Her hands checked each system component with methodical thoroughness that came from years of experience in high-pressure situations. She worked as if the young boy's life was in her personal hands. The Hawker business jet required a complete safety inspection before it could legally carry passengers on the emergency medical flight. Sarah had promised Captain Jake Morrison that his aircraft would be ready in 90 minutes. She intended to keep that promise without compromising safety standards or cutting corners that could endanger everyone involved. Jake paced nervously near the aircraft while Sarah worked. He checked his watch every few minutes and made phone calls to coordinate with the hospital in Denver. Each conversation reminded him that Tommy Parker was fighting for his life in a small regional hospital that lacked the equipment and specialists needed to save him. Sarah began with the most critical safety systems. She tested all flight controls by moving them through their full range of motion. Ailerons responded smoothly without binding or unusual resistance. The elevator and rudder moved freely with proper control feedback. All primary flight surfaces showed normal operation that would allow safe handling during the emergency flight. The engine inspection required careful attention to multiple components that could fail catastrophically during flight. Sarah checked oil levels and examined the engine for signs of leaks or unusual wear. She tested all electrical connections and verified that fuel lines were secure and properly routed. Each step was documented on her inspection checklist as required by federal regulations. Jake watched Sarah work with growing amazement. Her diagnostic skills and repair techniques were unlike anything he had seen from civilian mechanics. She handled complex systems with confidence that suggested extensive training and experience. Her systematic approach left nothing to chance or assumption. The hydraulic system inspection revealed the minor leak that Sarah had discovered earlier. The damaged line showed signs of slow seepage that could worsen under flight stress. Sarah knew that hydraulic failure during the emergency flight could cause loss of control and crash. The repair was absolutely necessary despite the time pressure. Sarah located the replacement hydraulic line in the hangar parts inventory. She removed the damaged line carefully to avoid spilling fluid on other components. The installation required precise torque specifications and proper sealing to prevent future leaks. She worked steadily without rushing through the critical safety procedures. While Sarah repaired the hydraulic system, Jake received another phone call from the regional hospital. Tommy Parker's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The medical team was doing everything possible, but the boy needed specialized neurosurgery that was only available in Denver. Time was running out with each passing minute. Jake felt helpless as he watched Sarah work on his aircraft. He wanted to urge her to work faster, but understood that mechanical failure during flight would help no one. His usual arrogance had been completely replaced by desperate dependence on her professional competence and judgment. Sarah completed the hydraulic repair and began pressure testing the system. She operated all hydraulic controls multiple times to verify proper function and check for leaks. The replacement line sealed perfectly under full system pressure. All hydraulic components responded normally with no signs of fluid loss or pressure drops. The electrical system inspection required testing multiple circuits and backup systems. Sarah used her multimeter to verify proper voltage levels throughout the aircraft. She checked all navigation lights and communication equipment. The radio systems functioned perfectly on all required frequencies. Emergency backup systems activated properly when tested. Jake was impressed by Sarah's thorough approach to each system check. She never hurried through any procedure or skipped steps to save time. Her attention to detail was extraordinary, even under extreme pressure. Every test was performed completely before moving to the next inspection item. The fuel system required careful examination of tanks, lines, and pumps. Sarah checked for water contamination that could cause engine failure during flight. She verified that fuel quantities matched the aircraft gauges and that all transfer pumps operated normally. The fuel system was clean and properly configured for the long flight to Denver. Sarah moved to the landing gear inspection with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the process. She examined tires for proper inflation and tread wear. Brake systems were tested for proper pressure and response. All landing gear components showed normal wear and proper operation for safe landing procedures. Jake noticed that other mechanics had stopped their own work to watch Sarah perform the emergency inspection. Even Frank Morrison observed her techniques with obvious respect and interest. Her systematic approach and diagnostic skills impressed everyone in the hangar who understood aircraft maintenance. The avionics systems required testing of all navigation and communication equipment. Sarah verified that GPS systems showed proper satellite reception and accurate position information. The autopilot engaged and disengaged normally with proper control responses. All backup navigation systems functioned correctly, in case primary equipment failed during flight. Sarah discovered a second potential problem during the avionics check. One of the communication radios showed intermittent static that could interfere with air traffic control communications during the emergency flight. The problem was not serious enough to prevent departure, but needed attention before normal passenger operations resumed. The radio static appears to be caused by a loose antenna connection, Sarah explained to Jake. The problem will not affect flight safety but could cause communication difficulties with air traffic control. I can secure the connection quickly without delaying your departure. Jake nodded his understanding and appreciation. He was amazed by Sarah's ability to identify and solve problems that less experienced mechanics might have missed entirely. Her thoroughness was protecting everyone involved in the emergency flight, while ensuring the mission could proceed safely. Sarah tightened the loose antenna connection and tested all radio frequencies again. The static disappeared completely and all communications were clear and strong. She documented the repair on her inspection checklist and continued with the remaining safety checks. The final inspection items included emergency equipment and passenger safety systems. Sarah verified that fire extinguishers were properly charged and located in correct positions. Emergency oxygen systems functioned normally with proper pressure and flow rates. All passenger safety equipment was present and in good working condition. Throughout the entire inspection process, Sarah maintained her calm, professional demeanor despite the life or death urgency of the situation. She never showed frustration or panic even when problems required additional time to resolve properly. Her emotional control impressed Jake as much as her technical competence. Other mechanics offered to help with documentation and tool organization, but Sarah worked more efficiently alone. She knew exactly where each tool belonged and which procedures needed to be completed in specific order. Additional people would have slowed down the process rather than helping. Jake made another phone call to check on Tommy Parker's condition, while Sarah completed the final paperwork. The medical team reported that the boy was stable but critical. Every minute of delay reduced his chances of survival. The pressure to depart immediately was enormous, but Sarah would not compromise safety standards. Sarah signed the final inspection documents and presented them to Jake for his review and signature. Every required check had been completed thoroughly and properly documented. The aircraft was legally and safely ready for the emergency medical flight to Denver Children's Hospital. "Your aircraft is ready for immediate departure, Captain Morrison," Sarah announced with quiet satisfaction. "All safety systems have been inspected and tested. The hydraulic repair is complete, and the radio problem is resolved. You have clearance to save that little boy life." Jake accepted the maintenance documents with genuine gratitude and respect. For the first time since they had met, he truly appreciated Sarah's professional competence and dedication. She had performed exceptional work under extreme pressure, while maintaining perfect safety standards throughout the entire process. Sarah Martinez completed the final safety check on Captain Jake Morrison aircraft and closed the engine cowling with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on her forehead from working intensively under pressure for the past 2 hours. The Nevada desert heat made the hangar uncomfortably warm, even with large fans running continuously throughout the workspace. The emergency medical flight was ready for departure. Every system had been inspected thoroughly and all safety requirements were met. Young Tommy Parker could finally be transported to Denver Children's Hospital, where specialists waited to perform the life-saving surgery he desperately needed. Sarah gathered her tools and began organizing them back into her toolbox. The systematic arrangement of equipment was an automatic habit that she maintained regardless of circumstances. Each tool had its proper place and function. Organization prevented mistakes and saved time during future repairs and inspections. Jake Morrison watched Sarah work with newfound respect and appreciation. Her exceptional diagnostic skills and mechanical expertise had impressed him more than anything he had seen in 15 years of aviation. She had solved complex problems quickly while maintaining perfect safety standards under extreme time pressure. "I cannot thank you enough for what you have done today," Jake said with genuine gratitude in his voice. "Your work might have just saved that little boy's life. I have never seen such thorough and professional aircraft maintenance performed so quickly and competently." Sarah looked up from organizing her tools and nodded acknowledgement of his thanks. She was focused on completing her work properly, rather than seeking praise or recognition. The successful preparation of his aircraft for the emergency flight was satisfaction enough for her professional standards. The heat in the hangar was becoming more intense as the morning sun climbed higher in the desert sky. Sarah felt perspiration running down her arms, inside the coveralls she wore for protection while working on aircraft. The fabric was starting to stick uncomfortably to her skin. Without thinking about it, Sarah rolled up both sleeves of her coveralls to cool down and allow better air circulation around her arms. The motion was natural and automatic. She had done the same thing countless times while working in hot environments around the world. Jake Morrison was standing close enough to see Sarah's arms clearly when she rolled up her sleeves. What he saw there made his blood run cold and his breath catch in his throat. For a moment he could not believe what his eyes were showing him. There on Sarah's left forearm was a tattoo that Jake recognized immediately from his own military background. The image was unmistakable to anyone who understood military insignia and special operations symbols. It was the Navy SEAL trident rendered in black ink with precise detail and artistic skill. The SEAL trident showed an eagle with spread wings perched on top of an anchor. A trident spear crossed through the design with a flintlock pistol positioned alongside it. Below the main symbol were additional markings that Jake recognized as deployment indicators and unit designations from combat operations. Jake stood frozen in shock as his mind processed what he was seeing. The woman he had been treating with condescension and disrespect for weeks was a former Navy SEAL. She had completed the most grueling military training program in the world and served in elite special operations forces. Everything about Sarah suddenly made perfect sense to Jake. Her exceptional technical skills came from military training on advanced equipment and weapon systems. Her calm behavior under pressure reflected experience in life-or-death combat situations. Her systematic approach to complex problems was standard operating procedure for special operations personnel. The diagnostic abilities that had amazed Jake were the result of training to maintain critical equipment in hostile environments where mechanical failure meant mission failure and possible death. Her attention to detail came from situations where small mistakes had catastrophic consequences for entire military units. Jake realized that while he had been playing the role of an important pilot, Sarah had been working alongside him as a genuine combat veteran who had probably seen and done things he could not imagine. The woman he had been lecturing about aircraft maintenance was more qualified and experienced than anyone else in the hangar. Sarah noticed Jake staring at her arm and followed his gaze to the tattoo that was now visible. She saw the recognition in his eyes and understood that her military background was no longer secret. She had been careful to keep her sleeves down around people who might recognize the significance of her tattoos. The SEAL Trident was not something that former military personnel wore lightly or without earning it through extraordinary dedication and sacrifice. Jake knew that fewer than 1% of people who attempted SEAL training actually completed the program. The dropout rate was over 90% due to the extreme physical and mental demands. Sarah had not only completed SEAL training but had served in active combat operations as indicated by the additional markings below her trident tattoo. Jake could see deployment ribbons and unit designations that suggested multiple tours in dangerous locations around the world. The respect that Jake felt for Sarah's professional competence was now multiplied by understanding of her military service and sacrifice. He had been condescending to someone who had volunteered to serve in the most dangerous and demanding role that the military offered to its personnel. Jake's voice was quiet and respectful when he finally spoke again. "You are a former Navy SEAL. That changes everything about how I have been treating you. I had no idea about your background and service to our country. I apologize for my behavior and attitude." Sarah rolled her sleeves back down to cover the tattoos and continued organizing her tools. She had never sought special treatment or recognition based on her military service. Her work record and professional competence were what mattered in civilian employment. "My military background does not change the job requirements or safety standards for aircraft maintenance," Sarah said simply. "Every plane receives the same careful attention regardless of who works on it or what their previous experience might have been. Professional competence is what matters in this hangar." Jake understood that Sarah was telling him that her military service was not relevant to their working relationship. She wanted to be judged on her current performance rather than her past achievements, but he could not ignore the new understanding of who she really was. The other mechanics in the hangar had noticed Jake's stunned expression and wondered what had caused such a dramatic change in his attitude. Frank Morrison walked over to see if there was a problem with the aircraft or the emergency departure schedule. "Is everything ready for the medical flight?" Frank asked while looking between Jake and Sarah. "The Boy family should be arriving at the regional airport within the next 30 minutes. Time is still critical for getting him to Denver." Jake shook himself out of his shocked contemplation and focused on the immediate emergency. "Yes, everything is ready. Martinez has completed all required inspections and repairs. The aircraft is safe for immediate departure to save Tommy Parker." Sarah handed the completed maintenance documents to Jake for his final review and signature. All paperwork was properly filled out according to federal aviation regulations. The aircraft was legally cleared for the emergency medical flight. Jake accepted the documents and signed them without the careful scrutiny he usually applied to maintenance records. He trusted Sarah's work completely now that he understood her background and qualifications. His signature authorized immediate departure for the life-saving flight. "Thank you again for everything you have done today," Jake said with deep sincerity. "I will never forget your professionalism and competence during this emergency. You have earned my complete respect and trust." Sarah nodded and stepped back as Jake prepared to leave for the airport. She watched him walk toward his aircraft with the maintenance documents that would allow him to save young Tommy Parker's life. Her work was complete and successful. The revelation of Sarah's military background had changed everything between her and Jake Morrison. The arrogant pilot who had questioned her competence now understood that he had been working with one of the most elite warriors in the American military. His attitude would never be the same again. Part 7. Respect Earned and Given. Captain Jake Morrison walked toward his Hawker business jet with the signed maintenance documents in his hand. His steps were quick and purposeful as he prepared for the most important flight of his aviation career. The emergency medical transport would determine whether 8-year-old Tommy Parker lived or died. The aircraft gleamed in the Nevada desert sunlight. Every surface had been inspected and tested by Sarah Martinez, with the thoroughness and precision that Jake now understood came from military special operations training. He had complete confidence in her work for the first time since they had met. Jake completed his pre-flight inspection quickly. He trusted Sarah's mechanical expertise completely after witnessing her exceptional diagnostic skills under extreme pressure. The hydraulic repair she had performed was flawless. The radio system functioned perfectly. Every safety system operated exactly as designed. Within 20 minutes, Jake was airborne and climbing toward cruising altitude for the direct flight to Denver. The aircraft performed beautifully with smooth engine operation and normal system responses. Sarah's thorough inspection and expert repairs had ensured safe and reliable operation for the critical mission. Back at Desert Sky Aviation, the news of Sarah's military background spread quietly through the hangar. Frank Morrison was the first to learn the truth when Jim Rodriguez explained what Jake had discovered. The other mechanics were amazed to learn they had been working alongside a former Navy SEAL. Sarah continued her normal work routine without acknowledging the changed atmosphere in the hangar. She completed the inspection she had abandoned to work on Jake's emergency and moved on to her next scheduled task. Her professional behavior remained exactly the same, despite everyone's new understanding of her background. Frank Morrison approached Sarah's work area with obvious respect in his manner. He had served in the Army during the Gulf War and understood the significance of SEAL training and combat service. His attitude towards Sarah changed completely once he learned about her military experience. "I want to apologize for some of the comments I made when you first started working here," Frank said with genuine sincerity. "I had no idea about your background and service. You have earned respect that I should have shown from the beginning." Sarah looked up from her current inspection and nodded politely. Military service does not change job requirements or safety standards. Every aircraft receives the same careful attention regardless of who works on it. Professional competence is what matters most in aircraft maintenance. Frank understood that Sarah did not want special treatment based on her military background. But he could not ignore his new appreciation for her exceptional skills and the sacrifices she had made serving in special operations. His respect was now based on complete understanding of her qualifications. 2 hours and 40 minutes after takeoff, Jake Morrison landed at Denver International Airport, where an ambulance waited on the tarmac. Tommy Parker was rushed directly from the aircraft to the specialized pediatric trauma center. The emergency medical team began life-saving procedures immediately upon arrival. Jake remained at the hospital while Tommy underwent emergency neurosurgery. The medical team worked for 6 hours to repair the damage caused by the falling tree. The surgery was successful and Tommy's condition stabilized. The young boy would make a complete recovery thanks to the rapid transport to proper medical facilities. The next morning, Jake called Desert Sky Aviation to report the successful outcome of the emergency flight. Tommy Parker was awake and talking to his parents. The doctors expected him to recover fully without permanent damage from his injuries. The emergency medical transport had saved his life. Jim Rodriguez gathered all the mechanics to share the good news about Tommy's recovery. Everyone in the hangar felt pride in their contribution to saving the young boy's life. Sarah's exceptional work under pressure had made the successful mission possible. Jake returned to Nevada the following day with a completely changed attitude toward Sarah and everyone who worked in aircraft maintenance. His arrogant behavior and condescending comments were replaced by genuine respect and professional courtesy. The emergency had taught him important lessons about competence and character. "Sarah," Jake said as he approached her work area, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did to save Tommy Parker. Your exceptional work made all the difference in getting him to the hospital in time. I will never forget your professionalism and expertise." Sarah continued working on her current inspection while acknowledging his thanks. The successful outcome is what matters most. Tommy Parker will recover completely and return to normal life. That makes all the effort worthwhile for everyone involved in the emergency response. Jake understood that Sarah found satisfaction in completing her work properly rather than seeking praise or recognition. Her focus remained on professional competence and safety standards regardless of the circumstances or people involved. Word of the emergency medical flight and Sarah's role in its success spread throughout the aviation community. Other pilots began requesting her specifically for aircraft maintenance on their planes. Her reputation for exceptional diagnostic skills and thorough safety inspections became widely known. Sarah continued her work at Desert Sky Aviation with the same quiet efficiency and professional dedication she had shown from her first day. She never spoke about her military background unless directly asked. Her focus remained on maintaining aircraft safely and properly for all pilots and passengers. Jake Morrison became one of Sarah's strongest advocates in the aviation community. He recommended her services to other pilots and praised her exceptional competence whenever aircraft maintenance was discussed. His respect for her abilities was genuine and permanent. The relationship between Jake and Sarah evolved into mutual professional respect based on understanding and appreciation. Jake never again questioned her technical decisions or treated her with condescension. Sarah continued to perform excellent work regardless of pilot attitudes or personalities. Frank Morrison and the other mechanics also developed deep respect for Sarah's abilities and background. They learned from her systematic approach to complex problems and her calm behavior under pressure. The hangar became a more professional and respectful workplace for everyone. Sarah's expertise with electrical systems and engine diagnostics made her invaluable to Desert Sky Aviation. Complex problems that stumped other mechanics were routinely assigned to her for resolution. Her success rate with difficult repairs was nearly perfect. 6 months after the emergency medical flight, Jake Morrison brought his aircraft to the hangar for routine maintenance. He specifically requested Sarah for all work on his plane. Their professional relationship had evolved into mutual trust and respect. "How is Tommy Parker doing?" Sarah asked while beginning her inspection of Jake aircraft. She remembered the young boy whose life had depended on their emergency collaboration. "He is doing great," Jake replied with a smile. "Completely recovered and back to normal 8-year-old activities. His parents send their thanks every few months. They will never forget what you did to save their son's life." Sarah nodded with quiet satisfaction and continued her systematic inspection of the aircraft systems. The successful outcome remained the most important result of that emergency day. Everything else was secondary to the fact that Tommy Parker was alive and healthy. The aviation community had learned an important lesson about recognizing competence and respecting expertise, regardless of appearances or preconceptions. Sarah Martinez had proven that exceptional ability could be found in unexpected places. Her quiet professionalism and extraordinary skills had earned the respect of everyone who worked with her. Jake Morrison had learned the most valuable lesson of his aviation career. True competence was demonstrated through results rather than appearances or attitudes. Sarah had shown him what real professionalism looked like under pressure. He would never again judge people based on surface impressions or prejudices. The story of the emergency medical flight became legendary in the Nevada aviation community. It was remembered as an example of how exceptional people sometimes work quietly in ordinary jobs, while possessing extraordinary backgrounds and capabilities. Sarah Martinez had proven that heroes could be found anywhere.